My name is Tina Moran, and I'm part of Flourish Ventures. Flourish is a venture firm with a purpose. And that purpose is to improve the financial lives of people all around the world. When COVID first hit, we responded and we started to look at who is the most vulnerable to this type of an economic shock. Early on, it was very clear to us that small businesses were being hit hard. But when we looked around, we felt that their stories were just not being told. So that's when we got together with one of our media partners, Archer Gray, and we decided we're going to go out and try to find a way to tell those stories. That is how we got introduced to Aaron Henkin. Aaron Henkin is an incredible radio host and podcaster with NPR in Baltimore. He has the award-winning podcast, Out of the Blocks, that's been running for over a decade, telling the stories of small businesses all across America. So we started talking to Aaron and we decided we were going to go back and approach those same small businesses from his podcast. And we're going to see how COVID was impacting them. We talked to an auto mechanic in Baltimore. We visited with a barbecue shop in Charleston, West Virginia. And we learned about the stories of a tiny boutique in Seattle called Momo. The resulting documentary is a collection of all these stories. And it shares the day-to-day challenges that these small businesses went through at that time, but it also shares stories of incredible resilience. So I am so excited to introduce everybody to Aaron Henkin. Aaron, it's awesome to see you.
Thank you, Tina. It's a pleasure to be here. And I just got to say thanks to you and all of your colleagues at Flourish for helping to make this whole project possible that we're going to talk about tonight. I love to talk shop, and it's an honor to be here.
Absolutely. I love seeing you in your radio studio. So honestly, before we even get into the documentary, and just so everybody knows, after this conversation I have with Aaron, we are going to be streaming the full documentary for everybody to watch. Also, we're going to be taking a 1 to 2 questions that the audience gives to Aaron. So if you have a question as we're going through our conversation, just drop that right into the chat. So Aaron, before we even get into the documentary, we have to talk about your podcast. Take us back to that moment almost a decade ago when you walked out onto a street in Baltimore and just started having conversations.
Yeah, thanks for that question. And thank you to everybody who's along for the ride tonight. I never take it for granted when people lend their ear. Listening is an act of love. I always try to remind myself of that every day before I go out and wander around and talk to strangers. This project started with this kind of journalistic leap of faith. I always had this idea of like, how do you find stories that you didn't know existed? And so when I say we, I have a co-producer, an electronic musician who, over the course of the podcast, has created these original musical scores. I got to talking with my friend Wendell, my co-producer, and saying, what would happen if we went to one city block and made it our mission to meet and interview everybody on the entire block, just as a formal experiment? Like, number one, what a great excuse to wander into the lives of strangers and listen to their stories. And number two, like, there's this idea that, the city block is kind of a custom built experiment in random juxtaposition, all these different lives, all happening simultaneously in all these adjacent little honeycomb cells that are just one wall apart from each other, but all these lives so different. But nonetheless, once you start talking to people, you realize how much we all have in common with each other, and certain common themes emerge. That's all to say, that I decided to pick a block in Baltimore. It was the 3300 block of Greenmount Avenue, if you're familiar with Baltimore. And I spent months there. My process had gotten a little more streamlined since then, but I was still trying to figure out what this was going to sound like. And I just took the time to build rapport with people, to be authentic and transparent about this idea, and to let people get to know me before I sort of got to a point where they felt comfortable with me bringing recording gear and recording conversations and getting to know them. And I ended up with like 25 hours of footage, and we boiled it down into a 1-hour documentary. And it really, when we put it on the radio and on the podcast, it sort of lit people up in a kind of a miraculous way. And we realized, like, there's one more than one block in Baltimore. We could probably do this again. And that turned into, the past 10 years of my life.
Well, I mean, it's something that we love and we're looking out to, how can we turn this beautiful podcast concept that you've created, all these individual stories that are contributing to this collective story of a neighborhood. How can we even turn that into a documentary? That is a challenge in and of itself. However, you went out to try to do this at the peak of lockdown, right when COVID hit. So not only could you not, fly to Seattle and talk in person with your relationships there, you can't even go out onto the street in Baltimore with a film crew. That's how big lockdown was at the time. So how did you even create this documentary?
Yeah, the lockdown was obviously a challenge and it ended up turning into a really interesting opportunity because with our media partners, Archer Gray, as you mentioned, we got around to this idea of, obviously, yeah, we can't go out and be, the idea of out of the blocks is being in other people's personal spaces and listening to them on their own terms. And we came up with this idea of like, well, and Flourish helped to fund this. Let's get together a packet. We'll create these little care packages of mobile recording gear, essentially cell phones and tripods and lighting systems, and these sort of sheets with prompts and directions on how to set up your camera and take different kinds of shots and tracking shots. And we really just handed over the power to all these people who are not only the subjects of this documentary, but they're actually, if you look in the end credits, they all get co-director credits because they really, this was like a video diary for people. They had the gear for a week, they could record as much as they wanted, and then they, shipped it all back. And we proceeded to take all that raw footage and go through that similar editing process that turned it into something that resembled stylistically and resonated philosophically with the original idea of the Out of the Blocks podcast.
I think that is what was so incredible about creating this documentary. You literally sent out iPhones and we had no idea the footage that we were going to get back. When we started seeing the stories, it was just incredible. So I want to share a clip so that everybody can see what we're talking about and kind of see what this looked like as it came together. This clip is it's spring 2020 in Baltimore. So we're in and out of lockdowns. Government relief programs have started, but a lot of small businesses are falling through the cracks and they're not getting the relief that they need. So you're going to meet Sissy, who runs a seafood takeout restaurant in Baltimore, and Latif, who's an auto mechanic.
We have a lot of people that want to work, but the bank is not giving us loan. They hold all the money. So we don't have no choice than to go to high lender money. We call it high lender, with the 15, 16, 17%. That's why you see the whole neighborhood with board house, board business, every business is done. And we on life support now. We on life support. We need help. So
business become nothing. Am I paying my bill? No. Because don't have it. Financially very difficult time. My son-in-law lost his job, but I hope so. But my daughter do work, but she doesn't make enough to cover the whole family. Medical insurance for their family is so high, so I'm almost half of it. It's okay. I'm glad I am helping side, not receiving side. So unfortunately, I thank God for that.
Aaron, when I watch this clip and a lot of the documentary, I just think about it's such a challenging moment in their lives, and they're opening up to you, and they're being so candid about what they're going through. How is it that you're able to build these relationships with people who start as complete strangers?
I never, it never ceases to amaze me. I marvel at the unique kind of relationship that is. Doing a documentary is like, it's like building a relationship on steroids in a way. Once you click with someone and once you develop that mutual trust and that rapport, you end up in these conversations that are way deeper than the kind of small talk that most of us make with each other in the course of our daily lives. I am not a licensed therapist, but a lot of these conversations end up having the feel of a therapy session. I think a lot of people, a lot of us, I imagine, probably don't have a regular opportunity to just open up and talk about our own lives to an attentively listening, non-judgmental stranger. A lot of us pay good money to do that by the hour, right? And so these relationships, they end up, people end up sharing. It amazes me what people are willing and able and eager to share about their lives. And, the amount of time I spend with them, it's the benefit that this documentary has is that I know all these people and have over the years. So we had that initial bond years ago, and I've kept in touch with them. And so we kind of were able to hit the ground running at a starting point that was way beyond a casual relationship.
I think that trust is so important, and just the idea of really listening and even more caring about what they're going through. Because it was such a challenging time, and they were still in the thick of it, and there really wasn't this understanding of what is going to come. I want to take us to Charleston, West Virginia, that barbecue shop that I mentioned at the beginning, because at the end of the summer of 2020, we were still in the thick of COVID, and they're trying to scale back. They're trying to pivot a little bit. They've gotten some government relief, but it's really not enough. So let's take a look at their story.
Our beef prices went from being maybe $2.89 to being almost $7.99 a pound. When you're buying, 500-600 pounds of meat, it makes a difference when the costs are hiked and, basically the supply chain was disturbed. It's a tough time for independent restaurants right now. It's even tougher when you kind of are basically fueling your own dream. After 3 rounds of applying, we eventually did get the PPP, so that has allowed us to kind of bring people on and give them some type of stability. I'm now operating with 5 to 6 employees. That's still not completely fully staffed, but they're here and they're working.
Now we are allowed to have at least 50% of our capacity, so we get people in and eat, get people from out of town still.
You are able to dine in, but you seat yourself, you dispose of your own trash. So it's just almost trying to become as contactless as possible. But it's tough because I think barbecue is a community food. So people want to be around people. My servers want to be able to interact with their customers.
Seeing there's no touching, there's no love in the world right now with COVID-19. You can't hug your people, you can't touch your friends, and that's rough. So you just gotta scale back and figure out a way to get through it.
Hold up, let her go.
We could have went out of business, but I don't have quit in my blood. Don't know how to quit, don't know how to stop, don't know how to give up.
You listen to that and you hear, I don't have quit in my blood. I don't know how to quit. I don't know how to stop. And that really is, you talk about common themes from one story to another. I mean, this was really a lesson to me in people's fundamental resiliency as small business owners, in that, I may not be able to pay this bill this month, but that doesn't mean I'm sunk. I'm going to figure out a way through this. My food prices are going up, supply chain issues and everything else, but quitting just isn't an option. It's just always, let's figure out how to get over this next hurdle. And once we do that, we'll look and see what the one after that is and figure out how to get over that.
It truly was a theme that you see through so many of the stories in the entire documentary. But at the same time, we know in the backdrop that a lot of businesses failed during COVID-19, despite their best efforts and hard work. And it's been hard for small businesses even before COVID. What has it been like? You've been doing this for 10 years. I'm sure you've seen a lot of change in the communities that you've gotten to know.
That's a good question. And it's so interesting how quickly a podcast or a radio or audio documentary will turn into an artifact of history. I think about, I mentioned that first block that we ever covered, the 3300 block of Greenmount Avenue. If you go back to that block today, I would say maybe 2 out of 10 businesses are still there. The rest are gone. And, it's kind of bittersweet, but it's also, I guess, just a fact of life in the world of small independent businesses, that businesses have a life cycle, just like everything else. And I say bittersweet because, it's maybe sad to see that name isn't on that store anymore. But you know what? There's another name on that store, and it's another new business that's taking their crack at it, and they're going to have their go. And, nothing lasts forever. But I like to think, and I know in some cases that some of those businesses that are gone, they're on a different block, or maybe they're in the county now, or maybe they're, doing some kind of a entrepreneurial endeavor from home. People are remarkably adaptable. And so, yeah, just to return to that word bittersweet, I'm not an economist, but I have learned, as I said, that small businesses have a life cycle, and that's, something to, not just to mourn the loss of a business, but to sort of celebrate the block as a kind of a incubator for that ongoing process.
Aaron, I think that is such a beautiful lead into the last story that I want to share with everybody. It's when we go to Seattle in the documentary, it's later in the fall of 2020. And you really do see that life cycle of businesses. So you have Leanne, who's running that little boutique Momo, who at the start was trying to pivot. It was really challenging, and ultimately her business went under. But then you see her going into Verdi's salon, who had the opportunity to buy the salon because of COVID and the previous owner closing it. Now she's the newest business owner on the block. And you meet Mike, who's running a Japanese restaurant, and he's been doing it for a year. So you really see it is this bittersweet story of there are businesses closing, but there's new entrepreneurs coming up. So I'd love to take us to that clip.
Hey there.
So my hope for the future comes from the fact that there are so many young people, even during this time of COVID, who are still interested in establishing their mark, their own small businesses in the neighborhood.
My parents left northern Vietnam after the war, and they went to a refugee camp in Hong Kong. And they actually stayed there for a few years, and they both immigrated to California, coming to a country where they didn't speak the language. They didn't have any support. That people depended on them. I honestly don't know how my parents did it. I find a lot of strength in that.
My biggest worry is not being able to make it what I want sooner than I want to. When is it going to feel safe for people just to come and hang out in the waiting room again? Like, I want to have like a big screen TV with a couch, and you can play Switch while you're waiting, and that is like, you can't do that. You can't do that right now.
Even if there is no end in sight, I feel very hopeful in terms of the community continuing to support us. We've had the tenacity the last 6 to 8 months. We will open the first day when we can again.
I hope to be able to continue making a difference to this neighborhood. I'm not sure in what way, but I'll figure it out some way.
What I love about this clip is it shows the entrepreneurial spirit of small brick and mortar business owners. They know they can and they will provide value to their communities in one way or another, as Leanne says at the end. So Aaron, can you tell us about what you've witnessed between the relationship between small businesses and their communities?
Yeah, I think what surprises me is how much these small business owners who take that entrepreneurial leap of faith, how much their lives and their outlooks on life are changed by that act. A lot of business is spoken about in very sort of cold, calculating terms, but I speak to business owners who get very emotional about the way in which their business has connected them to the neighborhood in a way that they never felt before. You think about Leanne, the woman whose business, Momo, closed she ended up becoming like a block captain, and really getting active in, city council, neighborhood council meetings, and sort of as an advocate for the Chinatown International District neighborhood in Seattle. And that came from her having a storefront on this block in that neighborhood. And, it's interesting because as a business owner, you end up, for financial reasons, for psychological reasons, for emotional reasons, feeling very, very connected to the fabric of the community. That was something that amazed me as I think about the sort of the scope of business owners, and that is a common thread, I think.
I mean, Aaron, this documentary that you've put together is just absolutely incredible. Before we go to see if there's any audience questions, I want to ask one last question. As we all sit down to watch this documentary together, what do you want viewers to take away from it?
Well, I'll say, I like the idea, actually, that the way this documentary is structured and the way the podcast has always been structured is, it's people in their own words, and it's not narrated. I'm not in there saying, now we're, on the such and such block and giving my editorial 2 cents. This thing, I've talked about this project being about these layers of trust between me and the people that I'm working with. It's also about kind of a trust in the audience to draw their own conclusions, to exercise their own powers of interpretation. So that said, I will tell you what I hope people get out of it. And that is that, a city block is, it's an accidental, inadvertent tribe that you become a part of. They say you can't choose your family. You can't really choose your neighbors on the block either. You can choose what block you set up shop on, but once you're there, for better or worse, you're going to get to know the people around you. And as you get enmeshed in that block, those people really come to matter to you. And I've noticed, like, during the pandemic, during lockdown, during tight times for businesses, those neighbors, they count on each other. They know they can count on each other. So that's something I hope viewers will keep in mind when they watch this. And also, again, just to return to that word, resilience. You hear people say all the time about the pandemic, we're all in the same boat. We're all in the same boat. I mean, we're all in the same body of water, I think, is the more appropriate way to look at that. And we have different boats of different sizes and different capabilities in that storm. And whatever boat you happen to be captaining, if you're one of the characters that you meet in this documentary, you are bound and determined to stay afloat, no matter what resources are at your disposal. And that's something that I deeply admire, and that I hope people respect when they see this as well.
Aaron, I think that is a beautiful note to end on. I don't see any audience questions at this time because I think you've stunned everybody. So I also don't want to keep anybody waiting for the documentary. So I want to thank you so much for being here today and giving us a little insight into what went into creating this and these relationships that you've built.
It's been a great pleasure, Tina. Thank you for the smart questions, and thank you everybody who's logged on and enjoy the show.